My mother slapped my son's hand away from the Christmas cookie tray so hard the sugar stars rattled on the glass plate. "Those are for the real grandkids." The room went quiet for half a second. Then my sister laughed. Not a shocked laugh, not a nervous one. A real laugh, the kind that says something cruel has landed exactly where the speaker wanted it to. Her husband smirked into his wine. My father reached for the gravy like nothing had happened. And around that table, with the lights on the tree glowing soft and gold and every plate already filled, the whole family did what families like mine do best. They resumed eating, like my 8-year-old son hadn't just been told, in front of everyone, that he didn't belong. My son's name is Owen. He froze with his hand still half raised, eyes on the cookies, cheeks going red the way children's do when humiliation hits before tears. He didn't cry. That made it worse. He just pulled his hand back and looked at me. Not confused. He understood. That was the part that nearly broke me. Because kids always understand more than adults hope they do. And Owen had already spent 3 years learning the strange grammar of my family, how my mother called my sister's children my babies, but called Owen your little guy, how my father kept framed school photos of the other grandkids in his den, but never once put up the one of Owen in his blue kindergarten cap, how my sister's children got overnight weekends, birthday money, and Christmas Eve pajamas, while Owen got polite gifts and the kind of smile people use on neighbors' children. He is my son. Fully. Completely. Forever my son. I adopted him when he was 5 after fostering him for almost a year. He came into my life thin, wary, and so careful with food that for the first 2 months he asked permission before taking a second strawberry. The first time he fell asleep against my shoulder during a movie, I sat there for an hour after the credits because I didn't want to risk moving and waking him. My family praised me in public for doing such a beautiful thing. In private, they never stopped acting like I had brought home a guest who had overstayed. So when my mother slapped his hand away on Christmas and said those cookies were for the real grandkids, it wasn't some shocking break from character. It was the first time she said the quiet part out loud. I stood up, not fast, not theatrical. I folded my napkin, set it on the table, and buttoned Owen's coat while my mother kept talking, as if the problem were my reaction, not her sentence. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said. "Don't be dramatic. There are plenty in the kitchen." The kitchen. Like relocation could erase rejection. I zipped Owen's coat to his chin. He still wouldn't look at the table. My father sighed. "Sit down and finish dinner." I looked at him, at my sister, Caroline, with frosting on her fork and that little victorious curve still sitting at the corner of her mouth. At her 2 children, old enough to know something ugly had happened and young enough to learn from what the adults did next. At my mother, Diane, who had built her whole identity around being the center of the family and somehow never noticed how often she demanded that title by hurting the people with the least power to answer back. Then I took Owen's hand and walked him to the car without touching my plate. He didn't speak until we were halfway home. He was in the back seat, still in his little green Christmas sweater, staring out at the dark windows of houses with lights in them. Finally, in a very small voice, he asked, "Am I not really yours?" I had to pull over. I parked under a street lamp in front of a closed florist shop and turned around so fast my seatbelt caught against my shoulder. "No," I said, and then immediately shook my head because that word landed wrong. "No, baby, listen to me. You are mine. You are my real son. You are my forever son. Grandma was wrong. She was cruel, and she was wrong." He looked at me for a long second, trying to decide whether my answer was bigger than her sentence. Then he nodded once. That was all. That was Owen, too. Quiet when he was hurt. Careful with pain, like he didn't trust the room to hold it if he let it out all at once. When we got home, I made him hot chocolate even though it was late. I let him open one present early, the astronomy book he had wanted for a month, and sat beside him until his breathing softened and he drifted off with the book open on his chest. Then I went downstairs, stood in my dark kitchen, and looked at my phone. No apology from my mother, no message from my father, nothing from Carolyn, just silence. And that should tell you almost everything about my family, except for one more thing. They all still expected me to make the loan payment. 2 years earlier, when my father's bakery was close to collapsing after a bad expansion and a very stupid equipment lease, I stepped in. Not Caroline, not her husband, me. I used my credit, my stable income, and the equity line I swore I'd never touch, and I signed for the restructuring loan that kept Mercer Hearth alive. My father called it temporary help. My mother called it what family does. Caroline called it nice that you finally found a way to contribute. Since then, every month I made the payment, quietly, reliably, even when business was slow, even when my father complained about my oversensitivity, even when my mother forgot Owen's birthday and remembered Caroline's son's baseball trophy. So the next day at 1:54 p.m., my father texted me, "Don't forget the business loan payment tomorrow." I read it once, then again. No mention of Owen, no apology for Christmas, no shame, just the bill. I stared at the screen, and for the first time in 2 years, the whole arrangement became simple enough to say in one line. I typed 5 words, "Ask your real grandkid's mother." Then I hit send. 3 seconds later, my phone started ringing. I let the phone ring 3 times before I answered. Not because I was hesitating, because I wanted my father to sit in that silence for a second and feel what it was like when the person you counted on stopped rushing to make things easier. When I picked up, he didn't say hello. What the hell does that mean? I stood in my kitchen, one hand still on Owen's astronomy book where he had left it on the counter that morning, and looked out at the wet December yard behind my house. "It means," I said, "ask Caroline to make the payment." My father actually laughed. Short, sharp, disbelieving. "Don't be childish." There it was. Childish. My mother humiliates my son at Christmas. My sister laughs. No one follows us to the car. No one apologizes. And when I stop protecting their bakery loan for one day, suddenly I'm the immature one. I kept my voice level. "The payment is due tomorrow. You have until tomorrow." "You signed that note." "Yes. For family." "No," I said. "For your business." That mattered, and he knew it. 2 years earlier, Mercer Hearth wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. My father had expanded too fast, signed a predatory equipment lease on a second oven he absolutely did not need, and then lost one of his wholesale contracts in the same quarter. The bank wouldn't refinance with his numbers alone. So he came to me, not Caroline, not her husband, who always had opinions and never had liquidity. Me. I was the one with stable income, clean credit, and the bad habit of still wanting my parents to be proud of me. My father sat at my kitchen table and said, "I hate asking this, but the bakery feeds 3 households now." My mother cried. Caroline said, "If this place goes under, Dad never recovers." So I signed, not because I loved the bakery more than my own peace, because that's what daughters like me get trained to do. We get handed urgency and told it's love. The refinance went through because of my guarantee and my debt-to-income profile. The monthly payment came out of my business account every month after that because my father kept missing transfer windows, and the bank gets nervous when older owners juggle dates. I told myself it was temporary. Then temporary became routine. Routine became expectation. Expectation became 1:54 p.m. on the day after Christmas, with my father texting me a reminder like I was payroll. "What did Owen tell you happened?" I asked. Silence. Then my father said, "Your mother made a comment she shouldn't have phrased that way." Phrased that way. I shut my eyes for 1 second, not because I was overwhelmed, because that sentence was so perfectly him. He could turn cruelty into wording, betrayal into tone, hierarchy into manners. My son had not been rejected. My mother had merely phrased something poorly. "She slapped his hand away," I said, "and called the other kids the real grandkids." My father exhaled hard through his nose. This is exactly why families can't say anything anymore. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because people like him always act oppressed when their behavior finally has a consequence. You watched it happen. I watched you make a scene. There it was, too. Always that. Not what they did. What I did after. I heard movement on his end, my mother in the background, asking what I was saying. Then Caroline's voice, lower, annoyed, already present. Of course she was there. Families like mine love emergency strategy sessions after holiday damage. My father lowered his voice. If you skip that payment out of spite, you damage my business, your mother's finances, and your own credit exposure. That was the first honest thing he'd said, not because he cared about my feelings, because he cared about leverage. I know exactly what happens if the payment fails, I said, and I did. That was the problem. I knew the loan better than he did. I had the restructuring papers, the guarantee language, the auto draft dates, the cure period, the notice provisions. I was the one who organized the refinance binder after the bank meeting because my father kept throwing key documents into the front seat of his truck and calling it a filing system. 3 months earlier, after he forgot the payment again, I asked the bank officer to send me a full copy of the current note and guarantor rider. I told myself I was being responsible. Really, I was being tired. Then stop this nonsense, he said. No. Another silence. This one longer. Then my mother came on the line. Sweetheart. I looked at the phone. Not because the words softened anything. Because it offended me. The same mouth that said real grandkids less than 24 hours earlier had now arrived at Sweetheart because money was involved. You don't punish a whole family over a misunderstanding, she said. I moved Owen's astronomy book farther from the edge of the counter. He was careful with things. It was one of the first things I learned about him. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm stopping something. Caroline's voice cut in from somewhere behind her. She's bluffing. That made me smile. Good. Let her keep thinking that, too. Because while they were all busy calling me dramatic, childish, emotional, and selfish, I had already done one more thing after dropping Owen at school that morning. At 9:16 a.m., I forwarded the loan file, the guarantor rider, and every payment confirmation I had made over the last 2 years to a commercial lending attorney my client Vanessa used in her divorce. Vanessa calls him the shark with cufflinks. I call him the first professional who ever read my situation and said in exactly those words, "Why are you paying their operating debt at all?" At 11:40, he called me back. By 12:05, I had signed one short authorization allowing him to notify the bank that all further communications about the guarantor position were to come through counsel and that I disputed my continuing payment obligation based on undisclosed risk and repeated reliance inducement. My father was still talking when I came back to the conversation, and if you think you can just walk away from a business loan with your name attached— I didn't walk away, I said. I referred it. The whole line went quiet. Even Caroline. My mother said, "What does that mean?" I looked at the clock on the stove. 2:03 p.m. They'll know soon. My father's voice changed instantly, not angry now, alarmed. Who will? I answered him with the cleanest sentence I'd had all day. The bank, my lawyer, and whoever you plan to blame next. Then I hung up. They started calling again 30 seconds later. I silenced the phone, turned it face down, and went upstairs to make Owen a snack for when he got home. At 2:17, my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "What exactly did you send?" I read it once, then smiled for real, because for the first time since Christmas dinner, the fear had moved to the correct house. Caroline's text sat on my screen for 12 full seconds before I answered. Everything the note says, you hid from the bank. Then I locked my phone and started cutting apple slices for Owen. That was the strangest part of adulthood, I think. The world can be splitting open in one room while, in another, you're wiping peanut butter off an 8-year-old's sleeve and reminding him not to feed crusts to the dog because the dog will absolutely hold him to that arrangement forever. At 3:06, my attorney called. His name was Grant Mercer. No relation, which I appreciated, and he spoke the way certain expensive men do when they already know exactly where the pressure point is and are deciding how hard to press it. "I've reviewed the loan package," he said. "Your father has a bigger problem than a missed payment." I moved into the pantry and shut the door so Owen wouldn't hear the rest. Bigger how? The banknote prohibits unapproved ownership changes, distributions to affiliated parties during supported restructuring, and transfer of operating assets outside the borrower entity without lender notice. I said nothing. Then Grant added, "He appears to have done all three." That got my attention in a way anger hadn't. Mercer Hearth, the bakery, had refinanced under a survival structure, lower payment, longer-term, personal guarantee from me, monthly reporting, and a covenant package strict enough that my father called it bank babysitting. I knew the broad shape of it because I had signed half the stack myself. I did not know what he'd done after closing. Grant continued. 8 months ago, your father amended the bakery's ownership records with the state. Caroline and her husband were added as members. For 1 second, I forgot what room I was in. Not because Caroline being favored surprised me, because the timing did. 8 months ago was when my father first started telling everyone the bakery was finally becoming a legacy business. That was also when he told me not to worry about the payment drafts because family is family and you'll be protected. Protected? I almost laughed. Grant kept going. 3 months after that, recurring payments begin to an entity called Weller Family Consulting. Caroline Weller, I assume. Yes. And 6 weeks ago, title on one delivery van was moved out of the borrower entity and into a related holding, LLC. I leaned one hand against the pantry shelf. He had been shifting ownership to Caroline's branch of the family while I kept making the loan payments. That was what my text had hit. Not just the bakery note, not just Christmas, inheritance. My mother's words from dinner came back with sickening clarity. Those are for the real grandkids, not just cookies then. The bakery, too. I asked, "Does the bank know?" "Not yet," Grant said. "They do now that I've sent notice." I shut my eyes. Of course, Caroline panicked. She wasn't shocked that I referred the loan. She was shocked because the file would show she had already been quietly installed as future owner while I was still paying present debt. Grant spoke again. The lender has called an emergency borrower meeting for tomorrow morning. They also want explanations for why the guarantor has been making monthly payments while ownership and assets were moved without consent. That was when I heard my front door open. Owen's laughter from the kitchen, then my mother's voice. I straightened at once. "They're here." "Do not discuss substance without me," Grant said. "If they want to talk, let them talk into their own record." Good advice. I stepped out of the pantry and found my mother, Caroline, and my father standing in my kitchen like grief. Panic and entitlement had decided to carpool. My father still had that same look from the day after Christmas, offended that other people were refusing to keep his emergencies quiet. Caroline looked worse. Mascara half smudged, jaw tight. Furious in the thin, embarrassed way of a woman who has just discovered she has been made legally relevant. Owen was at the table with his apple slices, watching them with the serious face he used when adults entered a room carrying weather. I crossed to him first, set a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Go upstairs with your book for a few minutes, baby." He looked at my mother once, then at Caroline, then nodded and went without argument. Good boy. My father waited until he was gone. "You sent the bank everything?" "No," I said. "My lawyer did." His face darkened. "There was no reason to bring in counsel." Caroline snapped before I could answer. "Do you know what you've done?" I looked at her. Yes, that made her angrier. My Mother tried the soft route first. "Sweetheart, the bakery was being reorganized for the future." "For whose future?" Silence. Then Caroline said, "Dad was trying to keep it in the family." There it was, the whole thing. Not a random financial decision, not bookkeeping. Bloodline. I asked, "While I paid the note?" My father cut in fast. "You were always going to be protected." I almost smiled, because that word always shows up when there's no document behind it. Caroline's voice went sharp. "The bank can force us to unwind everything. Us, not them, us." She heard it the second it came out, and so did I. I looked straight at her and said, "So I was good enough to carry the debt, but not good enough to inherit the business." My mother flinched. My father said, "This is not about Owen." "No," I said, "it's about exactly the same thing." Because it was. Real grandkids, real family, real future. All of it had always meant the same thing in my parents' house. Caroline's line gets the reward, mine gets the bill. My phone buzzed again. Grant. I answered on speaker. He didn't bother with greetings. "I've just received the lender's preliminary response. They've identified the ownership transfer, the affiliate payments, and the vehicle move as covenant defaults. They want all beneficial owners present tomorrow." Caroline went pale. Then Grant added one more sentence, clean as a blade. "And since Ms. Weller is now an equity holder, if the bank permits a cure at all, they will likely require her personal guarantee to replace yours." Caroline grabbed the edge of the counter like it had tilted under her feet. The bank meeting started at 9 the next morning and felt less like negotiation than an autopsy. Regional lending office. Glass walls, gray carpet. A conference table too polished for the kind of family rot sitting around it. My father was already there when Grant and I arrived. My mother sat beside him with both hands wrapped around a paper cup she never drank from. Caroline was on the other side of the table with her husband, Dean, and a leather notebook she had probably brought to look prepared. It wasn't working. Across from them sat 2 bank officers and outside counsel. No one smiled at me. Good. Because by then the smiles had all moved to the wrong side of the story. The senior lender opened with the cleanest sentence in the room. "Mercer Hearth is in covenant default." Then he listed them. Unapproved ownership transfer, undisclosed affiliated party payments, unauthorized vehicle transfer, guarantor reliance without notice of material structural changes. Each point landed harder than the last, not because my family didn't understand them, but because they did. Caroline tried first. This was an internal family business transition. The lender didn't even look at her. Then it should have been disclosed like one. My father leaned forward. "The bakery is still operating. Payments were being made," Grant answered before I could, "by my client, while ownership was quietly shifted to his other daughter's household." That line changed the room, not legally, emotionally, because suddenly the structure was simple enough for strangers to understand. One daughter carried the debt while the other was being installed to receive the asset. The bank's attorney slid a copy of the state amendment across the table. Caroline and Dean had been added months earlier. Then came the consulting payments, then the van transfer, then the guarantee packet with my signature still sitting there like a workhorse nobody intended to release until she kicked. The senior lender turned to me. "Ms. Mercer, had you been informed of any of these changes before your attorney contacted us yesterday?" "No." He nodded once and made a note. That note mattered more than anything my mother said afterward. And of course, she tried. "This is still a family matter." The bank attorney looked at her. "No, ma'am, it's a credit matter." Beautiful sentence. My father changed tactics fast. "If Claire just keeps making the note while we sort this out—" "No," I said. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The room was finally built for people who understood complete sentences. "No," I said again. "I am not paying for a business you reassigned behind my back while treating my son like he wasn't family enough to deserve a cookie." That was the first time Christmas entered the bank room. My father's face tightened instantly. Caroline looked down. My mother closed her eyes. The lender didn't care about the cookies, of course. but he cared very much about motive once it explained conduct. Grant placed one last page on the table, my payment history, 24 months of clean transfers from my account. Then he placed the ownership amendment beside it, 2 timelines, same paper, same months, same betrayal. This, he said, is why my client is withdrawing support. The bank gave them 2 options. Option 1, full cure package within 5 business days, reverse the hidden ownership changes, unwind the affiliate distributions, return the van to the borrower, provide updated financials, and replace my guarantee immediately. Option 2, acceleration. In ordinary language, fix it fast or the bank would call the loan. Caroline's husband finally spoke then, and his voice had that flat panic men get when someone else's family arrangement suddenly wants their signature. Replace her guarantee with what? The lender answered cleanly. With actual current owners. That was the moment Caroline went pale. Not at default, not at exposure, at ownership becoming real, because owning the bakery as a future family story had sounded lovely. Owning it as a present financial obligation with a personal guarantee attached was something else entirely. My father tried one last push. "Claire, don't do this." I looked at him. At the man who watched my mother slap Owen's hand away and then texted me about the loan the next day like my son's humiliation was a scheduling conflict. Then at Caroline, who had laughed. Then at my mother, who only ever found tenderness when money needed crossing a bridge. And I said the truest thing I had. "I'm not doing this. I'm just not covering it anymore." Silence. Then the lender asked the question that finished it. "Ms. Weller, if this business is being transitioned to your line, are you prepared to personally guarantee the restructured note?" Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, looked at my father, then at Dean, and finally said, "Not under these terms." There it was. The whole family in one answer. She wanted the inheritance story, not the debt story. The room changed after that, because once Caroline refused the guarantee, the bank stopped talking like this was a misunderstanding and started talking like it was recovery. By noon, the cure terms were in writing. My guarantee was suspended pending formal release. All further auto drafts from my account were blocked. Mercer Hearth had 5 business days to cure defaults or face acceleration. We walked out of that building with the story split open. My mother cried in the parking lot. My father called it humiliation. Caroline called it unfair. Dean called it what it was, a mess I didn't agree to. I took Owen for hot chocolate that afternoon after school. He sat across from me in the booth and asked whether Grandma was still mad at him. "No, baby," I said. "Grandma was wrong." He stirred whipped cream into his cocoa and thought about that. Then he asked, "Are we going back there next Christmas?" "No," I said. That answer felt cleaner than anything else I'd said all week. Mercer Hearth did not collapse immediately, but it didn't glide either. The van had to go back. The consulting payment stopped. The hidden ownership structure was unwound. And when the bank demanded a real guarantor, my father learned something he had somehow reached his age without understanding. The daughter you treat like backup labor does not stay available forever. The bakery survived, but smaller, harder. More honestly, Caroline never got her smooth little inheritance lane. Once the debt became visible, so did her limits. She wanted the family business only as long as somebody else carried the risk. My mother spent months trying to rephrase Christmas into a terrible misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was a clear sentence spoken to a child, followed by a table full of adults choosing comfort over correction. My father still, I think, believes the real betrayal was financial. That tells you everything about him. He never understood that the loan was not what broke the family. It was the moment he let my son hear exactly where he stood and then came for my money the next day anyway. As for me, I stopped paying for access to people who needed me useful more than they needed me loved. Owen and I made our own Christmas after that. Smaller, kinder, real. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have cut off the loan the next day, too, or given them one last chance after Christmas? And what hit harder for you, the slap, the text about the payment, or Caroline refusing the guarantee when the debt finally became hers? If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and stay with me for the next one.